Judging by the number of layoffs announced almost daily here in Silicon Valley, everywhere, it's clearly been a bumpy landing for the tech sector. Even huge companies such as Microsoft seem to be retreating in the face of stiff economic winds. Are these tough times for the tech sector, or will this industry of startups and gig workers instead see it as an opportunity knocking? With us to consider that, in London, Ontario, Carmi Levy. He's a journalist, tech analyst, and communications director for Step Software, a London-based custom development firm. And here in our studio, Brett Carraway, associate professor in the Institute of Communication, Culture, Information, and Technology at the U of T. AJ Tabando, co-founder and chief strategy officer at Pallet Skills, a nonprofit focused on helping Canadians transition to high-demand careers through employer-led upskilling. And Abdullah Snowbar, executive director of the startup incubator DMZ at Toronto Metropolitan University. He's also CEO of DMZ Ventures, and it's great to have you three here with us in our studio. Carmi, great to have you back on the program. Been a long time since we've had you on. It's good to see you again. Let's put some stats on the record here, shall we? This is from Statistics Canada from last year. What's going on in the tech sector, and these numbers tell a story. From 2016 to 2021, employment in the information and communications technology sector grew by more than 1/5, up more than 20%. As of May 2021, 673,000 Canadians were working in the sector. That represents almost 4% of total employment in the country. Among the 10 North American tech hubs, areas where the information and communications technology sector accounted for the highest proportion of employment in 2021, 6 are in Canada, 3 are in Ontario, including Toronto at nearly 7%, Kitchener-Cambridge-Waterloo at over 6%, and Ottawa-Gatineau at 6%. Okay, let's pick apart these numbers and see if we can figure out what's going on here. AJ, you're on the front lines of the growth in this sector. What's going on?
Well, I think we have a sector that has prioritized growth, and we saw it grow. We have a lot of brilliant people in this province, in this country, and throughout the North America who had an enabling environment that was funding them, was supporting them. There was a lot of money in the space that could enable that growth, and a lot of priority put on acquiring users and getting traction. And so, we sold, we grew, we saw that happen. So that was, pandemic put an accelerant, I think, on an already strong trend towards pretty significant expansion.
Because everybody was online during the pandemic.
Everybody was online during the pandemic.
Gotcha. And Carmi, now we're in the middle of some really tough news. What's the explanation behind all these recent layoffs?
Well, I think if you listen to the press releases that are being shared as those layoffs are being announced, they all carry a very similar theme. Oops, we overhired during the pandemic, and now we've got to dial back a little bit as we approach the far end or the back end of the pandemic. Mark Zuckerberg admitted it, and Microsoft made that very clear in its announcement as well, that they brought on too many people, and they kind of needed to. As a panic hiring situation, we were shifting even more of our lives into the digital space, and so tech companies needed to reflect that, staff up so they had people to expand their data centers, to grow their services, to create new services, to sell the ads across those services. And sort of now that demand has flattened out and in some cases is winnowing down, they've got to right size themselves. And that's the bad news. Of course, the good news is that even after all of these layoffs, most of these big tech companies are still much larger now than they were when the pandemic started. So it's a tactical shift. It's not a strategic shift, and the sky is not falling in tech, as some might suggest, just based on the numbers we're seeing.
We will pursue that notion in a bit. Brett, right sizing, is that the word you want to use for what's going on right now?
Sure, I think so. I think there was a party going on in Silicon Valley for many years, and it actually preceded the COVID lockdowns. A lot of these companies, like Amazon, is famous for not prioritizing profitability, but expansion and growth instead. And then I think we went into a COVID pandemic and we saw some changes in the way in which consumers were spending money. One of the things that shifted was spending on services like streaming services, because we were all locked in our basement. People were turning to Amazon and Netflix and Spotify. And then coming out of the pandemic, there were some supply chain problems. There was a lot of pent-up demand, all of which sort of pushed prices up. Now the banks are just sort of hitting the brakes a little bit, trying to push interest rates up. I think employment growth is starting to level off a little bit. There's some concerns about a possible recession. Consumers are tightening their belt. And I think what you're seeing right now is sort of a reprioritization of getting costs under control for a lot of these firms. Investment isn't flowing like it used to. Consumption is down. These firms, especially the digital intermediary platforms, are tied to the larger economy. So advertising's kind of drying up, and then layoffs are a sort of natural byproduct of that when you're trying to get your cost under control.
Well, layoffs are what we're hearing, certainly among the bigger companies, but would you say, based on what you're seeing out there, it's all the way through? Big companies, medium-sized, small companies as well?
Yeah, I think it's something that's kind of felt across the board, Steve. It's not unique to one size of company. Like mentioned before, I think a lot of people were dealing with what was a very unusual situation, which is called the pandemic. And there was a huge shift to kind of catching up to this digital transformation that really picked up faster than anybody ever imagined. So to get to that point, you had to make sure that you're actually keeping level-headed in terms of the demand, and people were hiring as they needed to. And money was cheap, to be honest with you. So, you could do it, and money was coming in, at a much easier pace than it is today. And now you kind of look back at what's happened, and people are now have to, balance out in terms of what maybe wasn't sustainable then needs to become more sustainable today. So it's a nature of the beast.
Yeah. It's a bit of a touchy-feely question here, AJ. When you're in tech, it's almost always go, 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 grow, grow, grow. And this hitting of the brakes is really unusual, capturing a lot of attention because it's so unusual.
Yeah.
Is it a bit depressing to see this kind of news when you're accustomed to so much growth and buoyancy?
I mean, I think layoffs are depressing often as news, no matter what. I think that it's a bit of a shock to a system that might have seen itself as being a little bit different or a little bit outside of some of the traditional forces of economic change. There's a lot of belief in that tech, especially when you're talking about digital platforms and software tools, it's different somehow. And I think that, beyond the sort of natural, sadness that layoff stories are, I think there's a real coming down to earth right now.
Which you folks are unaccustomed to in the tech world.
No, yeah, it's new. It's a new experience. But I mean, I think that tech folks often are, they're innovators. They look for opportunity in dark places, right? And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity here to turn this into a growth plan again. But I think there are structural changes here as a result of, as Abdullah said, this was a sector built on a lot of cheap money, a lot of, grow first, profit later, maybe. And like I said, those forces can't be fought in other sectors. I don't think it's realistic to think that tech is all that different. I think we're just at the end of a 10-year cycle of a new sector emerging, thinking it's plays by different rules, and the rules are now bringing us back down to a reality that, this is a sector in an economy like any other, and we have to behave accordingly.
I like that mission statement. Grow first, profit later, maybe. That was good.
I think that's a lot of companies, might not admit to it, but was very much the belief there.
Well,
and for a lot of investors, too,
here's the grim news right now as it relates to tech sector layoffs. This is what's been going on over the last couple of years. Globally, in the year 2022, more than 1,000 tech companies with layoffs and more than 150,000 employees laid off. Yikes. So far, in 2023, 122 tech companies with layoffs and more than 37,000 laid off, including 10,000 at Microsoft just yesterday. And since the start of the pandemic to now, there are 80 tech companies in select cities in Canada with layoffs and almost 6,000 workers laid off. Abdullah, I wonder, we've heard hints of this in our conversation so far. All of you are determined to find a silver lining in all of this.
Yes.
What is it?
I think this is partly a recalibration of what's happening and all the jobs that were coming in. The silver lining to me really is the fact that although you're losing jobs and maybe jobs that have become more, stagnant in terms of what's the need, there's a lot of new jobs coming in as well. So I think that's the one part that we're not looking at as much as we could. That new jobs are being created for new needs, and the market's kind of shifting what those needs actually are. And I don't think it's going to be as bad as it goes. The one thing to kind of point out is a lot of the North Star for startups and big tech companies was the term unicorn, which is to become $1 billion business at any cost and as fast as possible. I think there's been a steady shift towards a new term, which is CAMEL.
Which is
CAMEL.
okay.
And the CAMEL being more balanced approach and thoughtful approach, being more long-term, and of course having much more resilience to the situations ahead. So that's maybe the new way and the new thinking. And AJ mentioned the fact that there's a 10-year shift, and we're maybe shifting into this new model, this new way of doing business as tech companies kind of reshift and realign their ways.
Carmi, do you see any good news coming out of all these layoffs?
Yeah, first of all, I think what Abdullah says about creating new jobs, tech's ability to create new jobs literally out of nothing, I think resonates very strongly. This is not a stagnant industry, and you can take an idea and with the right context around you. We've seen this in all tech centers of excellence across Canada for decades, to literally create innovation and opportunity where none existed previously. So those jobs will be created. The infrastructure is there to drive this process, and certainly a longer-term focus on companies that are more sustainable. Camels, instead of unicorns. I think that's what Canada does best. It's what we've always done best. And if we zoom back and look at other periods of economic disruption, so the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, the dot-com crash in the early 2000s, it was tech that drove the recovery, because out of this type of adversity comes innovation. It creates the demand for what tech does best. And so, we've always seen, almost like we go pedal to the metal on innovation when things like this happen in the macroeconomic space. Certainly there are signs of that in Canada. All of the pieces are already there. We've done it before, and I have no doubt that we're going to be doing it again. So I look at these numbers, and sure, they're big. There are lots of zeros there, and they're kind of frightening. But the context within which we're looking at them, that's significantly more important. And those ingredients bode for a very bright future in the tech space in this country.
Brett, this is not meant to be a smart aleck question, but if I look at a camel, it goes like this and it goes up to the hump, but then it does come back down. Is that really the analogy we want to be using here?
I'm a little more guarded
Okay.
in my interpretation of what's going on here. I'm not necessarily optimistic or pessimistic. One of my concerns about the Canadian context is there's a lot of small to medium-sized enterprises in tech here, and the larger ones. So by small, I mean firms that have fewer than 10 employees. And that might be upwards of like 80, maybe more % of the Canadian tech firms. The remainder of 15% or so also tends to be dominated by a couple of, not a couple, but a small number of large multinational firms. Companies that with names like Meta and Amazon, Google, IBM that have made inroads here into Canada. So part of my concern here is that this is a sector-wide phenomenon, and this isn't a crisis that happens in the United States or in Canada. The border here doesn't insulate Canada from the worst impacts of an economic downturn in the United States. So I'm a little more guarded because I feel like the Canadian market, both in terms of its customer base and the amount of venture funding, is substantially smaller than what's available in the United States. And if that's a little bit tighter, it's going to be hard for these small firms to scale up so that they can compete against these larger multinational firms.
Okay, well, AJ, let me ask you about your world. Are you still seeing a demand to train workers in tech?
Absolutely. We're still seeing a huge demand for workers trained in tech. And I think when we look at the opportunity that this shift presents, it would be a mistake to think only about the tech sector, because one of the big things that happened over the last 10 years is that every sector became a tech sector. Advanced manufacturing firms are looking for tech workers. Agriculture, we run a digital agriculture program bringing tech workers into that field. Every sector is starving for tech workers. And so I think that one of the things we need to be thinking about is not just how do we shore up the companies that exist in the software and digital services sector, not just how do we kind of get people back into those jobs, but how do we take this moment and create a sort of cross-sectoral labor mobility opportunity here to transition workers into those areas that are growing, that might not be affected by some of these very tech-unique phenomenons, right? We might be on the cusp of a widespread recession, but a lot of the things we're talking about today are unique to tech itself, and the sector of software tech, I should say. And so, it's not going to necessarily affect the manufacturing sector the same way. It's not necessarily going to affect the clean tech sector the same way. We still see huge demand for those kinds of companies, those kinds of services. They're still really growing. So how do we take all of the demand for tech talent, whether that exists within the traditionally thought of tech sector or other places, and how do we make it easier for them to move into those fields?
Good questions. How do you want to answer them?
Well, you start by running a company called Palette Skills that builds services for upskilling workers into new career
I thought
paths.
we didn't run commercials on TVO. Okay, I guess I was wrong about that.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, this is a policy challenge that governments and organizations have been dealing with for decades, right? I mean, you hear it in the news all the time right now. We have a talent utilization problem in this country. We have the highest skilled workers in the world, and yet we still hear this challenge about skill gaps from companies, tight labor markets, difficulties finding talent. A lot of that has to do with how we're actually utilizing the skills that we have and the workers that we have, and keeping people sort of stuck in roles that they've had over years because we're evaluating based on sector experience or other things like that, create these artificial barriers to movement. So I think breaking those things down, giving people the skills to understand how to apply what they already know in a new environment is really the trick to making those pathways available and making them rapid at the speed that companies need new talent.
Carmi, I don't know if there's a role for government here. Maybe you can tell us whether you see one, and if there is, what is it?
I think there's absolutely a huge role for government because the key to the success of this process, as AJ described so eloquently, is partnership, and that partnership has to include government to create, the legislative frameworks, update the rules such that it's easy for human capital to move from place to place in the broader economy, to identify where those opportunities are, to access the programs that will make it easier for those job seekers to fill those roles that need filling. And who does that better than government within a particular geography? And it's not just at the federal level, it's at every single level. So, federal, provincial, even municipal, where you've got, local job boards, like here in London, we've got Tech Alliance, who will work with the startups to sort of bring them up, give them the oxygen, the air that they need, and help connect them to the resources that ensure that they aren't starved for human capital when the time comes. And we've seen that over the last 10 years, that as the gap between demand for tech human capital and the supply of it grows larger, that the need for these kinds of resources, often government funded, often government driven, create those partnerships between government, business, and academia, and you end up with centers of excellence like Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, like Toronto, like Montreal, like Vancouver. These things didn't occur in a vacuum, and a lot of them were the result of seed money, seed resources provided by various levels of government. It's been strong traditionally in Canada. It's strong today, and I expect it'll continue to be strong. Those investments will deepen in the years to come as we recognize what we need to do to come out of the pandemic and transition to that next generation.
Abdullah, I see you in my peripheral vision shaking your head vigorously, nodding along with what Carmi was saying. I guess DMZ is... DMZ, there's my Canadian accent coming out again. DMZ, as you guys call it, is very much one of those kinds of partnerships. So what do you think the role for government is here?
Well, I think from a government perspective, if you look at the tech sector generally and take a pyramid and flip it on its head, and top of the funnel, if we can call it that, ends up being talent and being able to continue the momentum on attracting talent and supporting talent and training talent and all that. And it comes with mindset. How do you make sure that people are actually learning about the idea of building businesses and starting businesses and solving for bigger problems that we're facing in society today? And you got to make sure that momentum continues to build through. And government plays a big part in being able to feed that hunger, whether it's supporting universities and thinking and how to deliver new programs on the mindset, whether it's supporting tech incubators and accelerators to be better rather than just maintaining and keeping status quo, to establish opportunities in programming like what AJ is doing, and I think kind of feeding those kind of winning programs to continue to grow and scale and become national in the best way possible. So I think that's probably the role of government. Rather than doing the work, it's enabling the work and staying out of the way from that part, to be honest with you, because government trying to deliver programs or trying to do it themselves isn't going to happen, that's for sure. But being an enabler of programs is going to be fundamental to the growth and sustainability of innovation and technology and startups in the province. So it's going to be really important to see that. And one thing that should be noted here is that tech isn't going anywhere.
Obviously.
And like I mentioned before, the problem sets in the country and the city are continuing to grow. And typically, entrepreneurs and people that have an interest in innovation want to solve for those problems. And you want to make sure that you're actually creating an environment that is allowing them to do so. And Canada, arguably, is probably in the best position possible today to do that. With all the factors that kind of play into it, whether it is the government support, whether it is great talent coming through, whether it is our geography in terms of where we sit, close to all these other big investment pools, because that is part of the recipe of building great companies is you need funding. And it's not all going to come from Canada for sure. A lot of it will be funneled through the States, of course, and that's all happening for us. So it's on us to make sure that we're delivering and continuing that momentum so that it doesn't kind of go off by the wayside. And we've done some really good work for the past decade, if I can put it that way. And we're only on the up and up from here. And,
Brett, as long as we're looking beyond our shores, let me ask you, we spend a lot of time in this country talking about brain drain. We want to reshore some of that talent. Is this the moment for that?
Possibly. I think there's incentives and disincentives here. For a worker to relocate internationally, which I myself did.
Hey, you're from Texas originally.
Yeah, so there's a different set of criteria. We're not exactly just free agents, and we can't relocate as easily. I shouldn't say as easily, but in the same manner that a firm can. So when I immigrated here, I left behind favorite restaurants, family, friends.
120 degrees in the summer.
Yes, very hot weather. And so there's a different set of criteria for workers. And so there are even Canadian workers, obviously, who are out in Silicon Valley right now. Most of them are on H-1B visas, and they have found themselves potentially as part of these 150,000 or so layoffs. Those people also, however, have children in American schools. They have mortgages. They have friends there. They have familiar haunts. So in order to incentivize them to come back here, I think that Canada has to do something more than offer them sort of a parallel move.
What do we need to do?
Well, one of the things that I think does make Canada just right off the bat a better option potentially is there's a rational path to permanent residency and citizenship here. If you're working in the United States as a tech worker and you've immigrated, the biggest share from India, then China, and then probably behind that would be Canadians. You're on a H-1B visa, which means the company that's hired you is sponsoring you, and those fees are fairly substantial, tens of thousands of dollars for the firms. And if you are suddenly laid off, you have about 2 months, I think, 60 days to find someone else to sponsor you. If you are here in Canada, you can achieve a permanent residency status after getting a work permit and become a citizen. As in my own case, it took me a matter of about 3 to 4 years once that process was initiated.
And you're a citizen now.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So that was a process that was years for me. But in the United States, we could be talking decades. So I think Canada automatically has that going for it. Immigration here isn't a weird, hot-button political issue like it is in the United States, where there's so much political polarization. As the United States is sort of slowing the pace of immigration, we're accelerating here.
And there's
in
quite a
Canada.
consensus around that, actually.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so, which is one of the reasons I think that everything in Southern Ontario, Toronto, and the 401 Tech Corridor has emerged as the fastest growing tech hub in North America.
Let me go to Carmi on that. Yes, in fact, the Toronto-Waterloo Corridor, as they call it, one of the largest in the world outside Silicon Valley. But there are layoffs, and I wonder what you think it's going to take to get people to stick around here as opposed to try to venture further afield to try to find work.
No, you make sure that when one opportunity ends, there are multiple additional opportunities available for perusal, as open to your choice. And that's really, if you look at the market here, a lot of the jobs that have been sort of open in tech, they've been open for years, and employers have been screaming for talent for long before the pandemic began. And in fact, that only became more pronounced as the pandemic accelerated and demand for that skill, hit an incredibly steep pitch. So, I think what we're looking at here is that there are additional opportunities in the market. The reason this corridor, through the spine of Ontario is as strong as it is because of those partnerships between government, academia, and business, and that, academia is working with businesses, building those relationships, long-term relationships, to make sure that the programs are designed to output the kinds of skills that are needed by business, and that the matchmaking between the right talent and the right role is made not after graduation but before graduation, through co-op programs, through other kinds of innovative involvement between academia and business, so that talent gets fed right into the market as it's needed. And then if layoff scenarios occur later on, you can fall back on those relationships to identify, okay, what does the landscape look like now? Where are the other jobs? Where else should I be looking? How have things shifted? Because if you lose your job in the past, you might not have known where to look. The resources now in this space are there to help you navigate that process and find that soft landing. It's better now than it's ever been before, and I see continued investment in that space. And incubators like DMZ, sorry, Canadian as well, have an integral role to play in terms of identifying that talent management landscape and making sure that everybody knows how to navigate that landscape as optimally as they possibly can, so they find those opportunities going forward and aren't incentivized to cross the border and look further afield.
AJ, a little over a minute to go here. Can you tell us whether you think this region, this Toronto-Waterloo corridor, still has the appeal today that it once had?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think this is an incredible corridor, not just for the tech, but for sort of the entire culture, the people, the environment, the opportunities. So I think, as Brett said, when you're making decisions about where to plant roots and where to set up your life, you're looking at a whole holistic set of things that you're considering. And I think that we have, Canada has a huge advantage in being a wonderful place to live and a wonderful place to build a business. Toronto-Waterloo corridor, even more so, I think. And so, I think that there's going to be, I think there is going to be a silver lining. There's going to be opportunity that comes out of this. It's going to look different than what it looked like before. But yeah, I don't think, as Abdullah said, tech's not going anywhere. It's changing. That's good. Change is good. So I think there's a lot of good things to come, but it's going to be a bit of a bumpy road for the next little while.
Grow first, profit later?
Maybe.
Got it. I want to thank the four of you for coming in tonight to TVO and helping us out with this. Carmi Levy, great to have you on again, the tech analyst from London, Ontario. AJ Tabando, co-founder, chief strategy officer at Pallet Skills. Brett Carraway, University of Toronto. Abdullah Snowbar, executive director, DMZ, whatever, at TMU. Thanks, everybody. Great to have you all here on TVO tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.